Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.
Jussi Pylkkänen. You are Finnish, but you came to live in England as a child, and then you lived here, you studied here.
I came to England as part of a very Finnish family where none of us spoke any English at all. And so actually my sisters and my parents had day and evening classes to study English together. And my sisters were 5 and 7 and my parents were in their late 30s, early 40s. And I was a babe in arms. But I really grew up here in England in a very, very Finnish, open, social, democratic, female dominated
What was your
environment.
father doing, and why did he decide, or your mother decided to come to England instead of living there?
Finland is a very small nation was a small nation of 5 million people at the time. And my father had travelled the world trading in the metals environment, non-ferrous specialist metals. And he traded here with a company which was the oldest trading firm in that environment in London. My mother was a textile engineer, and they both felt that Finland didn't offer their children what they hoped for. They had very expansive views of what the world could be for young people. This was in the 60s. And so they came to live in London, and for me, the rest is history. It was the start of an amazing journey, which I could never have achieved if I'd stayed.
But en famille, you were speaking Finnish?
Only Finnish. So when I left home at the age of 17 to go to university, it was my first experience of really being in a completely English environment.
Because you were also having Finnish friends around you more than English?
Yes. My grandfather was a very prominent arts professor in Finland, so I spent a huge amount of time going home, spending time with him particularly, meeting all the great actors and filmmakers of his generation and many of the international filmmakers and playwrights. I remember meeting people like Dario Fo, for example, when I was a very young man, a child really, and that had a lasting impression on me, that sort of ability to be living in your own space, thinking in an avant-garde way, and being very positive about the world, what the world could offer at a time in the 70s when I was growing up, when things were pretty bleak. And I think that influenced me hugely when I took my choices about what I'd do with the rest of my life. I wanted to do something which allowed me to travel, be expansive.
But you studied literature at the beginning, right? Before studying art, you were at Oxford and you studied literature.
Yes, I studied...
What literature? You studied English literature, comparative? Or?
I studied English and American literature effectively at one of the greatest institutions of the arts in the world, and had the joy of having tutors that were really first class. Elizabeth Mackenzie, who was a great Shakespearean expert, and Nicholas Shrimpton, who's an expert in all things, but particularly in Auden, Blake, and the great British authors of the last 150 years. So it was a great start for me. And they also had very focused but expansive views about what one could do in the arts. So they were very encouraging of me when I told them that my intention was to leave Oxford and to go and work in the art world in some capacity. My grandfather, obviously, as an arts professor, was pivotal in that as well.
You are a very faithful person because you joined Christies in 1986 and you left Christies a year ago at the end of 2013. So you did a lot of things. I don't know why, but you started with the print department and then you switched to Impressionist and modern art. Why? I mean, how come? And why did you stay so long at Christies?
Well, the irony of it is actually that I didn't intend to join Christies. They called me and asked me to go and talk to them, and I didn't really know what the agenda was. And when they offered me a position, I was 22. I said I was already very happy. I was planning exhibitions in America with the gallery that I was working for, and I turned them down. And it was my father who actually then, by chance on the very same day, met me and asked me how I was getting on. I told him that I'd just turned down a job at Christies. He was pretty horrified and marched me back to Christies. And on that very day, I met the same person who'd interviewed me, who was a man called Christopher Davidge, the new managing director of Christies. And And for some reason, I changed my mind. And it's the best decision I've ever made. I mean, I had the most extraordinary career at Christie's, one that I didn't expect myself, ending up as the president of the firm for quite a number of years. And, the adventures that I went on as the art market really took off in the late 80s was quite extraordinary. It's not repeatable because there's been a massive shift change, a change that was so significant that really I can't foresee anything quite as spectacular in a period of 35 to 40 years.
What do you mean by change? Because Pinot became the owner and something changed, or the world changed? I mean, obviously the world changed, but the art world changed. I mean,
there are a few very specific things. Until 1987, the world record for any painting was held by an old master picture, until the sale of Van Gogh's Sunflowers, which made the record for any painting when it came up for sale. So there was a massive shift in focus from old master painting, classical taste, to modern taste. And of course, then following that, it went from modern post-impressionist taste all the way to contemporary, with the likes of Bacon, Freud, Koons, Hockney selling for these extraordinary prices today. So that was the starting point. 87, everything changed. Change of the guard. And in 1987, the buyer of that picture was a Japanese corporation, the Yasuda Fire Assurance Company. And with that, we saw a whole shift in the power base, no longer America and Europe, and now it was Asia. And post that, it's been Asia, Russia, the Middle East, aside from broad race, and very specifically China more recently. And so that, again, that day in April 87 was a very, very clear marker of change. And that was the day that I saw my first evening sale at Christie's. I joined the firm in 1986, and I stood on the balcony watching this sale taking place in awe, not understanding, but seeing that there was this massive shift. And then following the discussions for the next 48 hours, I understood that my life was going to be in that arena. I wanted to be at the top of the market. I wanted to work with modern art, and I wanted to be an influencer. And of course, at that moment, when you're in this incredible organisation, whether it's Sotheby's or Christie's, these are great institutions, you realise that you could follow with great intimacy and great sort of insight what was actually happening in a way that when you're outside that marketplace, you can't. Whether you're a dealer, whether you're a collector, or whether you're a member of the press, a journalist watching, unless you know the truths of what's happening in the art market and who really is buying and why they're buying and where taste is going towards, you simply can't learn as quickly. And that's why I stayed. It's a very, very intoxicating environment of information. I love and I enjoy information. I like analysing the reasons for things taking place.
But before being the global chairman, first the European chairman, then since for 10 years you were the global president. But what is the job? The job is to find paintings, to find clients, to convince them to come to you. How does it work? What did you do? We're talking about this, then we'll talk about another part of your life.
What did I do? I studied. My experience at Oxford had been, if you want to be able to analyse and criticise and comprehend great works by literary giants, you must read them. Similarly, if you want to understand what a great Picasso, Monet, Cézanne, de Kooning, whatever might be, you have to know the artist's work from A to Z. You have to look at their young work, you have to look at when they had their high points, you have to look at when they became more commercial because they worked with a particular dealer, and you take your decisions about what is great by looking at the museums and seeing what the great curators of the last 150 years had bought when those artists were in their prime or even before they became well known. So the learning period for me, was around 5 years. And once I'd learnt enough, then I actually could go and talk to people about what they should be buying and look at great collections and encourage people to look differently at what they'd bought and what they should buy to improve what they had. And that became the thing that people came to me for.
But not everyone knows what an auction house is. In other words, if one person goes to an art dealer and wants to buy, let's say, any painting at Picasso, and they tell him it's worth such X millions or hundreds, the auction house it's never sure. People want to sell a painting, they say between this and this, but it's never sure. that it will happen. And sometimes they're disappointed when they don't reach the level, or sometimes amazed if the level becomes much bigger. So can you explain to a person who doesn't really know what's going on in an auction house, and why should one go to an auction house?
If you're buying works of art, you should seek out people whose knowledge in the field is exemplary. And it doesn't really matter whether they work in an auction house, whether they are an art advisor, or whether they are a museum curator. I think in the auction houses, the best specialists who've been there for the greatest number of years, who work with museums organising loans, who work with institutions, as I did, doing evaluations of great collections that they have as they made loans to other countries and so on, you are sure to get the type of advice that you can trust and that you can have confidence in. And I've always found that the best of those specialists, even when I was at Oxford, are very generous with their knowledge because they want to take other people on the same journey that they've been on. Think not about the money for a moment, which is a difficult thing to do when you talk about today's art market, but talk about the calibre of objects. And then once you've decided the calibre of objects you're interested in, then the issue about whether they're available, whether they can be acquired, becomes the next primary part of the project. But first of all, you have to feel comfortable that you're getting great insight from an individual that has intelligence, credibility, and information that they're prepared to share. And so my life in the auction world was really fueled by the specialists that I work with, many of whom are really the best in the world in their fields. And they can judge whether something's right or not. They can judge when it was made. They can judge whether there are better ones in the world globally. Because the museum curators can only really speak to things that they already know that are in the institutions. If you've worked where I have, you know what everybody owns, or you know a great deal of what people own in your field, because they reach out to you. And people have reached out to me throughout my career, which is also the joy of it, because every day you discovered something that maybe even the specialists who'd written the catalogue of Raisonnets didn't know. I've discovered pictures by George Grosz, one of the great Neuersächlichkeit artists. I've discovered paintings by Monet, Claude Monet of 1871 painting of great significance. Of Van Gogh paintings, which have been presumed lost. Others drawings by him that hadn't been seen. So as a person invested in the history of humanity through the arts, if you're working at the epicenter of the art world where people come to you and they ask your advice and show you things, it's wonderful, high-octane, intellectual environment to work in.
But you mentioned a doctor before, right? It's like if you were a specialist of something important, the most important hospital, and then if someone comes to you, you say, for your knee, you should go to this doctor who's the best for the knee, or you should go to that doctor who's the best for something. I mean, you know who are the specialists.
That's a very interesting point. Some of the most beautiful relationships I've created are with collectors that don't really collect in my field, but that have come to see me about a Cézanne, or a Picasso drawing, or a Peter Doig. And it's led to a conversation about what they're really interested in. They said tribal art. I said, well, I know exactly the person that you should deal with. You should deal with this person because they're best in class. They're outstanding. And we have at Christies somebody who I used to work with very, very closely, Alexis Magier, who is superb. Similarly, that person might be invested in buying old master paintings. And I might turn to a Francis Russell, who is a great expert in Italian paintings at Christies. So many of the collectors that I worked with, who, yes, did inevitably buy 20th century and 21st century art, would buy in 8 or 9 different fields. So the friendship that you create with that person colours your life, because they become much greater experts in the fields that you don't know about. And they're prepared to share their knowledge with you. So when I visit those collectors today and talk to them about the objects that we bought together, I always ask them, so what else have you bought? And I look around the room and I look at the magnificent things that they own in fields that I don't understand or don't know very well. And we share that knowledge. It's endless.
You started as an expert, but then you became a big manager, right? A president of a big company. But why you were also an auctioneer? I mean, isn't it a different job? Isn't it something else?
Yeah, it's an interesting question again. I was persuaded to become an auctioneer. I thought it would be a distraction for me. In fact, it was Christopher Davidge, the man that employed me. He made me the director of the Impressionist department very young. And he said the only way that you would be taken seriously is if everybody knew who you were. And the easiest way to achieve that in the marketplace was to become the auctioneer of the major sales that we held. And of course, I was very intimidated by that because it's not an easy environment. As you become more experienced, it becomes easier because you hopefully get a little bit better at it. But you never cease learning. It's a monologue. It's Hamlet on stage with his speech.
When you are an auctioneer and you have very important painting on sale, how do you feel? What do you feel? How does it work? And why you were so good? Also for that, you were very famous. We'll talk about it later. I mean, even now, in your career, you sold 6 paintings who went above 100 million. You sold this incredible sale. I mean, everybody tells you that, I imagine. But I mean, you are the one who sold the Salvator Mundi for the most extraordinary amount of money ever, 450 million. And then you sold paintings by Jeff Koons for a lot of money, or Andy Warhol, or paintings like that. How did you feel? I mean, did you know that the Salvator Mundi would sell for so much money? Or when you did this, you hammered, what kind of feeling you had? Because this is very different from the other job, right, in a way. I mean, you have to have a lot of knowledge. But
if you approach life in the same way, which is about preparation, I've always been a great preparer. So I don't like to go into situations where I don't feel comfortable that I have everything at my fingertips that I might require for that particular situation. So with auctioneering, you have to be fully informed. And I was known, I think, at Christies and probably throughout the world as the man that prepared the most by talking to all the collectors who were keen to bid on particular things, getting great information from very collaborative colleagues, and preparing for those evening sales as though it was the most important sale that was ever going to take place that I was going to handle. And every sale was the same, whether it was in a Chinese furniture sale, which I was asked to take by a collector who flew me to New York to do it, or whether it was a sale of prints from the Giuseppes collection, which was one of my last sales, great collector, a wonderful family and great friends of mine, or the Salvator Mundi, which I knew would be in the public eye in quite a significant way. I didn't really appreciate how much of an impact it would have on the art market or people's perceptions of it, but I was very well prepared. I travelled with the picture. I understood who was going to...
From where to where?
It came to London. We then went to Asia with it. We went to, obviously, New York with it. And all the great collectors came to see it. And the queues were extraordinary around every building where we showed it. And everybody wanted to talk to me before the sale because they knew that I would be holding the greatest sale of our generation, which it was.
Which was the basic price for the painting? You would have sold it for how much minimum?
We talked about this quite a considerable amount at Christie's before we effectively approached the owner to sell the painting. And I'd always said that it was worth more than any painting that had been sold before. And it was a question of where the starting point would be. I seem to remember that we set the starting point at around $120 million. My forecast of what it would make was around 220 million, so a further 100 million, which would make it the first painting to sell for over 200 million at the time. It was a very, very full sale room, never seen anything like it. And when I got to 200 million...
But how many people you knew before could afford 200 million for a painting? You knew who were the people who would have possibly...
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people that might be able to afford it. Whether they have the appetite to bid for it is a different thing. And of course, it's an old master painting, which takes you into a category rather than, it is one of the great images produced in the world of the fine arts. But obviously that limits it.
Make a parenthesis. When it is an old master, it's more difficult to know that if it is the real one, right? Then if you sell a Jeff Koons, he's alive, you see the artwork. I mean...
No, it's more about people having the appetite to buy a Rubens, Rembrandt, or Leonardo as a side to wanting to buy a Picasso, Basquiat, or a Cézanne, for example. There are more people in and 21st century market, many, many, many more than there are in the old master market. So just to go back to the question of how many people could buy it, the actual object limited the number of people that could go at it. There would be 5, 6, 7 bidders for it, and there were. It was exactly what happened.
How many there were? 7?
7 or so, and at the end of it, there were 3 that really took the bidding.
But what kind of people?
People that really are completely committed to buying major works of art. You know, it's a serious business. You're buying the essence of humanity. Artworks aren't just to hang on walls. They make a statement about who we are, and the greatest of them, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, and then you go on, Monet is the greatest artist of the 19th century, and then Picasso's the Mozart of the 20th century. So those artists, it's not just about what they're worth, it's about what they mean to us as reflections of ourselves. So the Leonardo was the essence, you know, you're buying the most extraordinary image of Christ. You're buying a picture which, when Leonardo painted it, I think he was very aware that he was creating a personification of the essence of Christianity in a way that was probably at the time quite a challenge.
And how long did it last, your performance?
19 minutes, I gather. It didn't feel like it. It went very quickly. I paused for a minute about 12 minutes in when we reached 200 million, because I felt that it was a new beginning. You know, we'd hit a number which really was so high and so strong that I needed to give the bidders time to mull it over where they were going next. And of course, there were 3 of them. Now, psychologically, the gladiatorial battle of auction requires 2. But when you have 3, it's extremely special at that level. You don't want to lose any of them. You want to carry them all with you. And interestingly, the 3rd, who was the quiet one, didn't drop out and followed and followed and followed and put a bid in at a very high number, which was probably the limit of where they were going, but they waited. The others were duking it out and going at each other with very large bids, $20 million bids, $30 million bids. That was the last bid. One bid at $30 million was the equivalent of the price of the Van Gogh Sunflowers that changed the art market in 1987.
When you reached 300?
Then it became very interesting for me. We went from 3 to 400 very quickly because we went bids of $20 million.
And at the end you had 2 people?
Yes.
How did it go?
Quickly. The underbidder was very regretful afterwards that he didn't get the painting and came to talk to me actually immediately after the sale as I got out of the rostrum. He stayed in the room, the underbidder, and came to talk to me, which is a sign of a man that really would have wanted to own the picture.
At what point?
He lost at the final bid, but the final bid against him was an extra 30 million. So
For 420, he came up to 420.
Exactly. The final bid with the commission was then at 450. So his bid would have been, I would have asked for another 10 or 20 million. I wasn't sure. I was pausing, thinking through what was fair to ask of him. He'd been bidding in tens.
You have the time to think in these situations.
I'm scanned. I'm finished. I have cold blood running through my veins. You have to be very calm. Under pressure. It's an interesting thing to do. I recommend it. It's a bit like skydiving, the moment when you're on the edge of the plane and you've got to jump, or when you go deep sea diving and you're going deeper than you've ever been before and it darkens. So you just have to be sure of yourself, be sure of your equipment around you, make sure that things are going to work. And Christies was very, very organised.
And then you said 450.
Sold, exactly.
And at the time, you were already the president of Christies?
Yes, I was very much the president of Christies. I mean,
That was a good year for Christies, right?
There were a few good years. We had an amazing run of 10 years, really. From 2014 onwards, the specialist team organised some extraordinary sales with many pictures at 20, 30, 40, $50 million. And those are the days when we were having sales worth $700 million, $800 million. And today the sales are 300 million, 400 million. So the market is different to the market that I worked in a decade ago. That having been said, the appetite to buy great works of art is still as high as it ever was.
Yeah, but there is fashion involved in the sense that you may buy a painting for 100 million and then it's worth 50 million.
That's far less likely than you buying a painting worth 100,000 being worth 10. So if you're buying a major work of art, it's much more likely that it will increase in value than drop.
Salvator Mundi, okay, it's obviously right. It's like La Gioconda, or,
Exactly. It's exceptional. It stands outside.
It's more than exceptional.
It stands outside the art market per se. If you look at, let's say, Picasso, there's an artist that is, as I mentioned, the Mozart of the 20th century. You can buy many types of Picasso, and not all of them will increase in value to the same degree. And certainly the best, let's say, Marie-Thérèse of 1932.
There are many.
But of 1932, go for the date, go for the subject, go for the artist. In this instance, I remember at one point 6 out of the top 10 Picassos ever sold were of 1932 Marie-Thérèse pictures. And that was over a long period, which goes to say that there are certain works of art by certain artists that resonate and will continue to resonate with us over generations.
Why is Marie-Thérèse more important than some Cubist works, or than the blue or pink period, or why? What makes it? And you're right. I mean, Picasso is covering the whole century, so there are so many kind of Picassos, right?
So he's a great artist to look at when you answer the question about
because
taste.
If you buy a Monet, it can be London, or it can be like a Cézanne, it's Montagne Sainte-Victoire or something, but it's not as Picasso.
The variations of Picasso make it very interesting because you can judge the progress of taste through looking at Picasso. When I first started in the art market, blue and pink period Picassos were by some degree the most valuable, most expensive, most sought after. Partially because many of the privately owned ones got bought. Their price became sort of less easy to define. But actually what happened also is that slightly more 19th century view of painting that Picasso inevitably used at the time from 1901 when he arrived in Paris through to 1905, 1904 was looking backwards more at Toulouse-Lautrec, at the classic artists working in France.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to, if the Harlequin is Cézanne or Picasso, right?
Exactly. So he was looking backwards to the last century. But in 1987, 88, they were the most expensive Picassos. As that generation of collector passed away, all the works disappeared. So their interest in the next generation shifted elsewhere. Cubism, interestingly, was always quite a refined taste. Analytical Cubism, tough. Leonard Lauder buying a lot of them.
He gave them to the Metropolitan.
Gave them to the Met as a group, which is wonderful because if you ever want to do research into a period of art, you can go and visit the collection and see it.
But Cubism, which obviously is very important, but there is Braque, there is Miro. They're not the same, but there is a similarity. In the Marie-Thérèse, there is no similarity.
But what Picasso and Braque did was that they redefined how the next generation of artists and collectors should look at objects and landscape. So they created a new vocabulary of non-objective painting, essentially, of saying, we're going to deconstruct, as Cézanne had begun to do, the way in which we can paint what we see. What happened then was that the artists all went on their own journeys with the Fauvists, colour, German expressionism with their looseness of paint, and it developed into a whole new variety of different dishes that you could enjoy. And then it was up to the collectors which way they wanted to go. What Picasso did was he was able to synthesize a lot of the best work that was being done in colorism, and some of the high points of his career are where he did the greatest synthesis of what other great artists were doing. He synthesized. So in 1932, he had met a very young girl who was extremely attractive, 17-year-old Marie-Thérèse, and he was 50. He was happy. He was in good spirits. He was 50 and at the height of his painting powers, and he had this new vocabulary created in the teens and the 20s by a whole school of great painters, avant-gardists. And he synthesized it. He looked, and he created purity. And when you see those paintings of 32, the scale of them, the ambition of them, the precision of them, the colours of them, and the pure joy, you understand why they are the most sought after of Picasso's works, or were for a certain period. They are sublime.
But he repeats this with Maya.
So Marie-Thérèse becomes the
icon.
And then after that, he moves to other great subjects. later in his career, which equally are sought after, but to a lesser degree. So François Gillot, for example, Jacqueline.
Beautiful portrait of François Gillot is now in the Berggruen collection in Paris, no?
Absolutely, and Jacqueline as well.
Dora Maar.
Dora Maar from the 40s. So you've got Dora, you've got Jacqueline, you've got Françoise. So all of these female portraits become quite iconic. But interestingly, over the last decades, some have become more appealing to 21st century collectors than others. And what actually has happened is that with the advent of sort of a return to painterly art, the likes of Cecily Brown, say, those collectors that buy 21st century painting are now buying late Picasso from the 60s and 70s and paying very high prices for them, because the vocabulary that Picasso managed to create at that time now resonates with the taste, the aesthetic of new buyers. And that's when you get this shift in value, because more people then are trying to acquire
But
them.
this is also because of people like John Richardson or like Rosenthal, who have decided that the last Picasso was very important vis-à-vis what was said before, that he wasn't so important.
Yes, I mean, John Richardson
Because
was an influencer.
Who is deciding?
Norman Rosenthal is an influencer. He's putting together this Late Hockney show in Paris next spring. He believes totally in Late Hockney, which is very interesting, and I look forward to the show. I've seen what he's planning, and it looks outstanding. So it's a reassessment, isn't it? And I remember when I was studying English literature at Oxford that we weren't allowed to read books post-1960. This was 20 years later, but I felt that was incorrect, because obviously the more recent work resonates with young people more. And it'll be interesting to see how Late Hockney resonates with a younger audience when it's presented in a curatorial manner. And Norman is one of the great curators. He put on, extraordinary shows at the Royal Academy, and we've worked together, and he is a genius. And it'll be very interesting to see how his eye influences people's tastes over the next 20 years after that show takes place.
But as you know better than anyone else, you said Monet, you talk about Monet as the very important impressionist. But then there are people who say the greatest is Manet, or some say something else, it's Cézanne, I mean, these judgments influence the auction?
Yeah, they can do. I think if you are able to talk to collectors about the importance of objects and share your enthusiasm, they can follow your judgment. And that's certainly something that I experienced in my time. I bought a Cézanne painting in a sale in New York 10 days ago, which I think is a masterpiece from 1879. And yet I was the only bidder.
Why?
Because perhaps Cézanne is overlooked, or perhaps that type of Cézanne painting is not something that resonates with the taste of the younger collectors that are in the market today. I think they made a mistake, and I'm delighted to have bought it. And similarly,
when you say I bought it, this is because you did something also quite interesting. You said age 60, I would leave Christies.
yes,
So you were at the top of your career. Nobody wanted you to go.
my career is just starting.
But you said at age 60, I will go out and I will be on my own.
Yes.
And you became, I don't know how to define it, a counselor, an advisor.
Yes, sort of
on your
counsel
own.
advisor
I mean,
to...
now you are just you.
Yes,
you see
I'd say just to...
Pylkkänen, right? And so what do you do now? First of all, you may feel free.
Yes, I feel very free. Listen, last week I talked to a collector who has a beautiful Picasso painting that I'd like him to lend to the Tate. So I talked to the director of the Tate about that yesterday, and she's delighted. It's a picture that's never been shown in London, in England before, and hopefully it'll be in the Tate in the Picasso show later next year. Similarly, I went to New York to look at the sales. I looked at a very good Kandinsky of 1921, which was in the sale at Sotheby's, and I bought the Cézanne of 1879 for a client that is very engaged in buying pictures that define cultural shift over the last 100 years. And that's what I'm interested in. I remember when, again, going back to my Oxford days, the scholars that we were tutored by, the professors, were in their 60s, some of them in their 70s. and they'd made a commitment to share their knowledge and to expand out into different fields. And they did that by, committing to giving time to it. And I think if you don't commit time to the things that you care about, you can travel through life with lots of misgivings afterwards. And I want none of that. I want to feel that I've managed to research the things that I'm most interested in and share that with other people.
But why did you say that your career just started?
Because I have a business which I am running with my son and with my partner, who is somebody that worked with me at Christies for many years. I can choose to focus on the things that I would like to do. And I've had an amazing first year defining what those adventures will be.
They say that the art market is not as good as before now, but...
I think the auction market has changed. There's a paucity of material, a lack of great things. I think a lot of the collectors are advised by people that have access themselves to great things, and a lot of the collectors are buying more things privately, right at the top of the market.
This is what you do.
And this is what I will be doing, and what I have been doing, yes. So the days of the art market being the only forum where high prices could be achieved has already been over for some 10 years. And the ability of, people that own great things to work discreetly, to sell those things to collectors that are wanting to acquire them for their own collections, it is pretty straightforward.
There are many reasons why people buy an important work. I mean, is it ambition? Is it an investment? Is it a pleasure, a social statement? All these things together, or there are also pure people?
Oh, there are very pure people.
Who say, I really want that painting. I would love to own that painting.
Yes, those are the people I work with.
The pure people.
And it can be museum curators.
As you said at the beginning, or during this conversation, you said that the money, even if Christie's was obviously a business, money comes after.
Yes.
And this reminds me something that I learned when I interviewed the singer Luciano Pavarotti. We talked, and he said he was very poor. And one day he said to Herbert von Karajan, who was the conductor, he said, "Maestro, what about the money?" And Karajan said to him, "Sing well, and you'll see the money will come." And this was a lesson for me in life, and it's somehow what you said.
Yeah, no, that's always been my mantra, is that focus on where your talents are, and your talents will always allow you to achieve what your dreams are, because application is critical and everything will follow. Be the best that you can be in the field that you work in, or any field that you're interested in, and the rest will follow. Don't ask for it in advance. Never ask for it in advance. Never ask for recognition or money in advance. You don't need to. The recognition will come if you do a great job. And the people that like Karajan or Pavarotti are exemplary, examples of that, are they not?
Yeah, money is a consequence.
Yes, it's never the driver.
But nowadays, tastes have changed. I mean, nowadays there are people who come from many other countries. There are collectors from Asia, from India, from South America, from the Arab world. And also young people have a lot of money nowadays, which is different. I mean, all this start-up technology, people who suddenly become millionaires or billionaires,
Don't be frightened of young people. Most scientists have their moments of genius in their early 20s. There's some wonderful treatises written about this, that the human mind is at its most inventive between the ages of 23 and 27. And those individuals that have made fortunes in new technology or in science, or even ambitiously in business, can have great clarity, lucidity, and taste. And I think the other thing that sometimes I find curious is that people say the art market has become very different because there are Middle Eastern collectors, there are Asian collectors, there are Russian collectors who don't really understand what they're buying. I find that very, very difficult to understand and appreciate because they themselves come from ancient cultures who have extraordinary taste. And therefore, when they applied their taste to the acquisition of other works of art or cultural objects from other parts of the world, why is it for us to judge whether they are able to quantify or to pinpoint the caliber of what they're buying? And they have lots of yardsticks. I mean, anybody that comes into the art market can very quickly get a measure of what they might have to pay for certain things that they're interested in. So it's not as though information is not available in the way that it was in the 80s. It was very opaque. But with the advent of new technology, you can become pretty adept at understanding almost anything in the world, and particularly the value of art and what people are prepared to pay for works of art.
And these new people, new generations, they like art?
100%, yes. I mean, art is everywhere. Art is the essence of humanity. So, much as people...
What do they like? Different things?
Yes, but, Justin's son, who has made fortunes in new technology and is a great judge of many things, he bought the Catalan recently, and it's up to him whether he feels that buying a very interesting work of art in its own ways is for him. And equally, he's a collector that's bought works by Picasso, and these are people that are new in the market, but that make their judgments and buy what they wish based on their taste, but certainly have the taste and education to make good judgments. So youth and new people coming into the market have never bothered me. The world has always been thus.
And there are also new artists coming to the art. And since you started your own venture, let's say, which is a synthesis of what you did before, are you happy? Do you like it?
Yes, it's interesting to look at what you want to focus on. So for me, it's analysing the top of the market. For me, it's supporting the museums as they look for works that haven't been shown before. It's looking at contemporary art and supporting artists. I'm working with a great sculptor from the north of England on a series of monumental bronzes. No, it's going to be a very interesting 10 years ahead of me.
Why 10 years?
I think 10 years, I want to give it a good run. I'd like to look at how the auction world will change and adapt, which it will need to, and I'm sure that I'll play a part in that in the future. So my auctioneering will continue.
And you don't miss the adrenaline of being an auctioneer, which is different?
I only miss the fact that I haven't taken as many sales this year as I'd like to, but there will be other sales that I'll be able to take.
But when you see other auctioneer, when you go to a sale and you see another person to be the auctioneer, how do you feel?
I see where I might do things differently, or I witness where they trip themselves up, but I'm always with them, It's a small team of people and we're very supportive.
And to be an auctioneer is a talent, right?
Yes, and they're not all good.
What are the qualities, the most important qualities you think an auctioneer should have? You said to be calm.
Yes, you have to be very calm. You have to be very well prepared. You have to have the audience on your side. So you have to be very much a people person. You have to judge each person that's bidding because they all have a different view of life and they think differently about the process of giving bids and you taking them from them and encouraging them to bid on. Some don't want you to acknowledge them. Others only want the acknowledgement to feel more secure. The better you are knowing your audience, the better an auctioneer you can be. So I don't really believe in having auctioneers that don't know the top collectors in the world taking sales.
It's because after all, the people in the auctions, not all of them, but most of them are always the same. I mean,
yes, and I always made a point of introducing myself to all the new ones, all the emerging collectors, because you can give them guidance and you can talk to them about what their own tastes are.
What is the aim? You have to create competition, you have to create momentum.
Yeah, I think that you have to be the conductor. You have to be like those conductors. You have to understand the different parts of the orchestra and make sure that you pay attention to each of them. You have to pay attention to each of them. You have to be very lucid.
Have you been disappointed sometimes in your long career? I mean, that you said,
got that
didn't
wrong.
go so well, I wasn't that good.
I was always, after sales, I never felt comfortable with the performance.
Never?
Never.
Not even with the Salvator Mundi? Maybe you had a shock.
The Salvator Mundi was described as the most orchestrated sale in the history of the art market. There was no orchestration. It was just how it went. It went like a dream.
And you think it's possible to repeat, that there will be one day another iconic thing? That
Yes. But it's beautiful when everything goes well, ticks like a fat gold watch, as Plath would have said, you know, when everything just falls into place. I was very fortunate. I had many moments where things fall into place, but I had the support of great people that really knew what they were doing.
Thank you.
Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.